back into this.
Yeah.
It's been like a month
Yeah.
since we've had it.
Got a thin class today.
So I still am. Have any of y'all tried to watch the videos on YouTube yet?
I haven't yet. I was gonna send it to my mom though.
Have you?
Look at, I think the first one.
First one? Okay.
I haven't-
My brother's
I haven't really
watched all of them.
over it. No.
He calls me and texts me every night, hey, on this one you messed up here. Hey, on this one you messed up here. So where we are is Isaiah 13, Isaiah 14 is the burden of Babylon. Okay, Isaiah has been going through the first 12 chapters, and he kind of alludes to something Assyria might do, something Israel, the northern tribes are going to get, whatever. He deals with Ahaz. But he keeps interjecting messianic prophecies. He does not stop. It's just every other chapter, and some are very direct. Chapter 7, very direct, very easy to spot. They're like Christmas songs type stuff, whatever. But there's a lot of them that you may or may not even know that they are messianic prophecies. And he's just doing it every single chapter. And the way I'm teaching this, the way I've been teaching this is that Isaiah, the messianic prophet, I didn't give him that nickname, right? If you've ever studied that, he's called the messianic prophet because he's really concerned, ultimately concerned, with Christ and events in the first century. Even though he's, 6th, 7th century, 8th century, BC, 7th and 8th century, I guess is when he's living. But he's really ultimately concerned. Everything is pointing towards that first century. And the stuff going on during his day was the precursor, the type, antitype situation where, hey, kind of this, what's going on now, it's going to happen again. And when you get to Isaiah 13 and 14, which is, to me, the funnest part of the class, because this class is not, hey, we're going to study Isaiah. This class is designed to teach you how to study the book of Revelation. Okay? And the big controversy in Revelation is, who is Babylon the harlot? Well, we are now on Babylon. And when you read chapter 13, he says, hey, burden of Babylon, I'm going to send a nation from afar. I'm going to completely kill everybody. I'm going to run, if I find you, I'm going to run you through with the sword. The children are going to be cut to pieces. Everybody's going to die. The whole land's going to be desolate. Nobody's ever going to live there before. And what's the problem with that? When Babylon is destroyed. When Babylon is conquered by Cyrus in 539 BC. What's the problem with that? None of that happens. Cyrus sneaks in through a gate, a water gate, and there's a couple of minor skirmishes according to history. They kill Belshazzar, and that's the only recorded death in the whole thing of history that there is. None of the rest of that stuff happens. But I think a lot of people say it's not a failed prophecy, it's a figurative Babylon. It's a mystical Babylon. They all use the term, all commentators will use the term mystical Babylon. I say figurative, but it means the same thing. They're like, hey, it's representing something else. And what we've been doing is we've been going through each of the verses, trying to figure out who it is. Now, we had, in here, I'm saying what I think it represents. I'm giving my opinion. And I'm saying, hey, this mystical Babylon it's not literal, it's not talking about Babylon 539 BC. It represents something. Isaiah is the Messianic prophet. He's dealing with stuff during the time of Christ, during the first century. The book is about what? Verse 1. Chapter 1, verse 1, the book is about Judah and Jerusalem. Chapter 13 and 14's mystical Babylon represents something concerning Judah and Jerusalem during the Messianic times. So I say that mystical Babylon represents apostate Jerusalem, first century Jerusalem, the ones that killed Christ, the ones that were persecuting the Christians. When you get, one of the things that we looked at was, where was Peter? What was Peter an apostle of? And everybody in here that was in here very familiar with this section of the class. Peter was the apostle to the Jews. Peter was in Jerusalem. He did not leave Jerusalem when everybody else was dispersing from Jerusalem. And Peter says, hey, talking in 1 Peter 5, he's like, hey, he's writing to the elders here in Galatia. He said, hey, we're fellow elders with you. We're elders here at the church at Babylon. Okay? He's saying Jerusalem is Babylon, is what he's saying. He's an elder of the church at Jerusalem. And we went through all the different examples in here of how Peter was in Jerusalem. He's in Jerusalem. Paul has to come back to Jerusalem to meet with Peter. He's never found in the Bible to be in Rome, because that's your two main theories in the Church of Christ. Babylon in Revelation represents Jerusalem, first century, or Babylon represents some version of Rome, first century. But only Catholics will say that Peter was an elder of the Church of Rome. Okay, they want him to be the first pope, so that they put him there. The Bible never puts him there. You don't find him there a single time. So that's what we're doing. We've said, okay, I've come up with this hypothesis on mystical Babylon in Revelation, in Isaiah, to be Jerusalem. And then we've started going through each of the verses in chapter 13 to see if each of these verses fit what actually happened in the destruction of Jerusalem in the first century AD. And we've been going through and kind of linking them to other passages in the Bible, linking them to historical records, Josephus, Tacitus, whatever. And you can see that, like, just for example, kind of at the end, what we were ending with before we had the long Christmas break, as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, when he's giving the Jews their warning there in the first century, he says, hey, I'm going to overthrow you like Sodom and Gomorrah. So every verse in here has a cross-reference to somewhere else in the Bible where it is very direct warning about the destruction of the Jews there in the first century. We went through Matthew chapter 10. We're showing a lot of the examples of how the Jews were just coming after the Christians. I wanted to go over a couple of definitions before we got going. Okay? So just to read these out here, before we get into chapter 14 at all, I wanted to go over what the NCAA says targeting is.
That wasn't targeting.
Okay? It says a defenseless player. We got a UT fan right here.
UT grad, and it was not targeting.
A player attempting to catch a forward pass, or has completed the catch but hasn't had ample time to protect themselves, has clearly become a ball carrier yet. If the player leads with the helmet,
He led with his face mask.
which is part of his helmet, and to attack with forcible contact the head or neck area of the opposing players.
No launching.
It doesn't say anything about launching.
You didn't, look what you had targeting number 3.
Yeah.
First 1 and 2.
It doesn't. You don't have to meet all 4 rules.
Oh.
There's 4.
Uh-huh. I see. Yeah, that wasn't targeting. It was a nice tackle.
Is that the face mask or is that the crown of the helmet?
If you look at it from the better angle, it's from his face mask.
Yeah.
That's the crown of the
I
helmet.
think it's face.
You think that was
Yeah,
targeting?
it was face to face. Yep, see?
Yeah.
UT fans in here like that.
It's best.
Every shot.
What'd you say,
I
Tom?
shot-
Don't ask me.
Tom did. Huh? I just put that in there for Cody. I figured that would get you wrong.
Yeah, no, still a target.
No, it was not.
I mean, when Scatterbo was thrown into the end zone, that was illegal. You can't throw people in the end zone. But correct team.
That's
won.
never called
Correct team won anyway.
the correct team. All right. Chapter 14. When you read the commentators, you could go into Bible Hub and type in Isaiah 13:1, Isaiah 13:2, and read all of their ideas on it. They're like, yeah, this is mystical Babylon, whatever. Some of them might give a little bit of it might be this, it might be that. But most of them are like, this is mystical Babylon. It doesn't really happen. None of this stuff really happens. But they don't take the next step in saying what they think it is. I do take that step. I say that it's this. And they kind of do when you get to 14:1 and 2. It's very interesting. When you get to 14:1 and 2, they agree with me. And again, I never read this stuff before I started preparing for this class. Let's read 14:1. For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. You have a little bit of a literal fulfillment in Esther. They return back out of Babylonian captivity, and there's some people kind of living in their area, and they're afraid of them, and so they kind of join. So there's a little bit of a literal fulfillment there. So that makes kind of the second verse in these two chapters that have an actual literal fulfillment of it. I still don't think it's talking about that, though. And that's what every one of these guys are going to say. Stay in the context. Stay in the Messianic prophet, it being about Judah and Jerusalem. This be a warning to first century Judah and Jerusalem. When the Christians come out of that first century persecution, everybody starts joining them, Jews and Gentiles. And what we're talking about here is basically Ephesians chapter 2, all of it, but specifically 19. Now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but you're all fellow citizens with the saints. The household of God, or the house of Jacob, God's people. You are all together now. This verse is fulfilled in Ephesians 2. This is the type fulfillment, but that we're not worried about the type, we're worried about the antitype. We're worried about the ultimate end target. And when you go search it up on Bible Hub, and I just want to do 14:1 and 2 today. I don't want to do anything past that. When you go to Bible Hub and you do 14:1 and you say, hey, give me the commentaries on it, these are the people that pop up. Every one of them says, yeah, this was about the first century. 14:1 is literally fulfilled during Christ's time. This is a messianic prophecy. So what are they saying? They are saying that mystical Babylon represents something during the messianic times. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it represents something during the messianic times. They're all saying this. These are all well-respected, got big books, all that kind of stuff. I don't have that. I don't deserve it. But They do, and they say the same thing. 14:2. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord, your servants, handmaids, and they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. You should be thinking very figurative here, very metaphorical. So there's a couple of issues with this being literal. The type doesn't hold up as well on verse 2 as it does on verse 1. So let's look at the literal real quick, the type, the 539 BC. When they're freed in 539 BC, do they return to their land and take a whole bunch of Babylonian people captive? No. They don't even leave. They just hang around. They don't take anybody captive. They don't do this in 539 BC. Kevin or Cody, one of them were texting me. I can't remember who it was. It was a month ago. So we're talking about, hey, somebody out there thinks that Babylon represented Assyria here. And was that you?
Yeah, it's in the NIV Study Bible. They think they claim it's Assyria.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So and I told Kevin, I said that one interested me as a type a lot more than Babylon, because a lot more of the stuff fits that one, but it still falls apart in various instances, and especially on this verse, because when Judah and Jerusalem go into Assyrian captivity, which we've got a little bit of a problem there right away, because does Jerusalem specifically ever go into Assyrian captivity? Nope, they don't. They don't. The angel of the Lord comes, kills 185,000, the Assyrians leave. Jerusalem is not conquered. It was the only loss the Assyrians ever had. I don't know that they accept that it was a loss, but they lost. They did not successfully conquer that town that they had their sights set on. So there's the problem. The second problem with this is, and this is the more major problem to me, if that's not a major problem for you already, when Assyria is destroyed, what year? What year is Assyria destroyed in? 612?
I was going to say
So-
that.
Huh?
I was just going to say that.
You were going to say that?
Yeah, it was
609, 612, somewhere around there?
Yeah.
And so that's fantastic. Let's act like Jerusalem was conquered, and there's a whole bunch of people in Assyria that have been there for like 100 years. When does that happen? 722. That's when the north falls. When Assyria conquers the north in 722 BC. Decade later, something like that, is when they attack Judah and Jerusalem. I may be off a little bit on my time frame, but it's in the 700s.
Yeah.
Okay? Now we're talking 100 years later that these supposed Jerusalem captives, which doesn't make any sense, they shouldn't be there anyway. When Assyria is defeated, now they are wiped out, everybody is killed, so they fit a lot of the stuff a lot better. But look at verse 1. They're going to go back into their own land. Let's say they're coming out of this Assyrian captivity in 612, 609 BC. They come back into their own land, and then what happens immediately after that? They go right back into Babylonian captivity. Hey, you got 3 years. You get to return to your land and do all this magical, great, awesome stuff, and then you're going to go right back in. So if the first captivity, if mystical Babylon here is representing Assyria, and they come out of Assyrian captivity. They're there for a couple of years, and then they go right back into Babylonian captivity. That makes no sense to me. The theory completely falls apart to me. That's why I rejected that one. I do like it a little better than, like if you had to make me pick ancient Assyria or ancient Babylon, I would say, well, it fits a lot more with ancient Assyria. But there are still major, major issues with it. And that's why I rejected that one and moved away from it. I did look into it, but I saw a couple of major problems. No Jerusalem captives going there. There's no record of any Jews coming out of Assyrian captivity. Those people were all assimilated into that society, and they turn into Samaria and whatever.
Well, and if Assyria is completely destroyed, how can the Jews take them captive?
Right, if they're all dead, how are they taking them captive? And yeah, when you get into studying it, and y'all probably have, when you start studying it, how are they taking anybody out of that? They're all dead, right? Tom.
Another thing to point out here. So in Isaiah 14:1, there is house of Jacob.
Yes.
Isaiah 14:2, house of Israel. Okay.
Okay, I like where you're going.
So I only recently ended up having, like I did a kind of a study on this for the worship stuff I was doing in the Sunday morning class. And that's not a vague statement for God's people. That is most times when you see house of Jacob, house of Israel, it's a very, very explicit reference to the temple. So you got a couple timeline temple problems that emerge if that is talking about the temple. One is in verse 1, it's the Gentiles joining to the temple, which the temple goes away, right?
The New Testament version of the temple
Exactly, which
is
makes
the
it figurative,
church.
right? And then you got an issue with the Assyrian one, because I think at the time frame you guys are talking about, the temple's destroyed, right? It wasn't rebuilt until Herod brought it back.
That's under the Babylonian one.
Yes.
Right. That's the 539. Right. Yes, you can get into a lot of these kind of details, and they're all going to say the same thing. They're all going to fit. It all works together. When you have this, let Isaiah be the messianic prophet that he is. Let him focus on the first century, and don't try to make his stuff be about random other events. He's not concerned with that. He's concerned with Christ and the first century, the coming. And we're going to get to the back half of Isaiah. It's a lot of fun. It's super easy. The Gentiles are coming out of the church. The Gentiles are going to be a part of the church. You're going to adopt the Gentiles into your tent. You're going to bring in all these people, and they're going to be too many people for the land of Israel to even hold. The Gentiles are going to be, Christ is going to be a light unto the Gentiles. The islands are going to join the earth. They're going to join the land. It's just over and over. Every single chapter, it's a different metaphor, because Isaiah's Mr. Metaphor, and it's all about one subject. The Gentiles coming into the church. You're going to get done with this book, you're going to get done with this class, and you'll be like, this is an easy book. You're going to start off, you're like, man, he's so cryptic, he's so metaphorical, but at the end you're going to be like, oh yeah, the Messianic prophet is talking about Christ and the coming of the church, the New Testament church. He's very redundant. I want to read what these guys all say. I kind of got a couple of slides here of their words. So you're not just hearing it from me. And again, I cannot stress this enough. I arrived at this conclusion, I want to say maybe late 1990s, early 2000s. I did not read this stuff until about 6 months ago. And we say the same thing. And they're like, I'm like reading this stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, I thought I was going to hate these guys. But no, they all say the same thing. Benson, I'm just going to go in order here. But without question, this is the quote from Benson. But without question, these words have further meaning in them and point at those times under the gospel, when the apostles and the other ministers of Christ, who are of the Jewish nation, could conquer a great part of the Gentile world and subject them to the worship of the true God, obedience to the Jewish Messiah, and the laws of Christianity. when you're reading this, you need to be thinking Mr. Metaphor. Metaphorical captivity and serving and all of that stuff. Like when you're baptized. That's metaphorical. He's talking about dying, being buried, and being resurrected. That's all. That baptism is very metaphorical, right? God uses this the whole time. The parables, they're all a bunch of metaphors about the church, about Christianity coming in. So to try to go literal with everything you read is a lot of times a mistake. Matthew Poole, but this was more evidently and imminently verified in a spiritual sense in the days of the gospel, during the first century. When the apostles and the other ministers who were of the Jewish nation conquered a great part of the Gentile world to the worship and obedience of their Messiah. Gil, another guy. And I don't know when these guys are writing. I don't know. I have not studied these guys before. And in a spiritual and mystical sense, there's that word mystical, has been fulfilled in the times of the gospel, through the spread of it in the Gentile world by the ministry of the apostles who were Jews, by which means many of the nations of the world were brought to the obedience of Christ and his church. The Geneva Study Bible, signifying that the Jews would be superior to the Gentiles and that they would be brought under the service of Christ by the preaching of the apostles, which all are brought to the subjugation of Christ. And he quotes a verse there. It's not just Gentiles, it's also the Jews, because they also are spiritually conquered and converted.
You know what's interesting is that before looking at this with this class that you put together, I kind of had the opinion, like when I would look at references to Isaiah, and somebody would say, oh, it's the Messianic prophet. I'd be like, oh, well, there's like 7 chapters that he's really heavy-handed on the Messianic stuff. And then if you ask the question, like, how many Messianic prophecies are there about the coming Messiah? And that one's a little bit cryptic, there's some between 500 and 800, depending on how they kind of count it. And how many of them are fulfilled in the lifetime of Christ? This was like a whole thing that, like, some people have done work on, like, 300 to 350-ish of those, let's call them 500, have been fulfilled in the life of Christ and have an expectation of future fulfillment. And this is one of the things that sometimes turns people off about, is Jesus the Messiah? I don't find that to be the case today, but this is, like, there's books written about it. Like, Lee Strobel wrote one major section of one of his books on this particular question. And what's interesting to me is, as this stuff is being laid out in front of me, the number maybe ought to be a lot higher, because instead of thinking specifically Messianic, if you think about what are the predictions of first century Judaism, what are the predictions of temple, what are the predictions of, the Gentiles folding in, what are those predictions? The number maybe is 1,200,
Sun, moon, and stars.
and
How much
those
is that?
are all fulfilled 100% during that time frame. So it's a stronger case, I think, even than what people make it out to be.
That's why we're going through this class, is to unearth a lot of the, that's a Messianic prophet. We're going to start talking about trees here in a minute. I don't know when we start talking about trees. The fir trees, the whatever, and you'll be like, why are we doing that? That's a Messianic prophecy. That's a first century prophecy. I'll kind of give it away now, because I'm trying not to move any further today. What built the temple?
The cedars of Lebanon.
Firs and the cedars of Lebanon. But then you get into Isaiah, and you get into I think it's in the 40s, the chapter 40s, he starts talking about, hey, we're going to rebuild this temple, but we're not just going to have the firs and the cedars of Lebanon. We're going to have the shittim tree. We're going to have the box tree. We're going to have the oak. We're going to have all these different trees are going to come in and build the temple.
Which aren't native to that part of the world.
They're not native to that part of the world. What does that mean? That's the Gentiles. The Gentiles are going to be joined in with the fir tree and the cedar tree, the fir and cedar of Lebanon. And all of these things are gonna be brought in to be fitly framed together to build the house of the Lord, Ephesians chapter 2. Right, but if you just go read that, if you were to read that section, and I may have it here, I may have gotten ahead of myself. If you just go read that section, you're like, why are the trees happy? That's weird. Why are we just randomly talking? It's first century prophecy. That kind of stuff, I guarantee you those people miss. Because it's not direct.
Yeah.
You have to think about it for a second. And you have to think, okay, what are the fir, what are the cedar of Lebanon building? They're building the temple. And once you say that, it should trigger in your head, oh, we are the New Testament version, the spiritual version of the temple. So yeah, the whole class is based on what you just said. Or the book of Isaiah, I think. And there's a veil. There's a part of the veil that we're going to get to eventually. I think that's in the 20s, might be in the 30s, I can't remember where it was. We're gonna start talking about that veil that Moses had, and it being pulled back and whatever.
Well, the veil of separation between the inner sanctum and the outer.
Yeah, all of that stuff. Isaiah starts talking about that stuff, and you're like, you're talking about Christianity. That thing is specifically there to hide Christianity, because they couldn't understand how the Gentiles would be a part of the church. It's a different metaphor. The trees are the same thing. The islands are the same thing. It's Mr. Metaphor. He just uses different metaphors to say the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
I don't want to go any further. I know we've got a lot of time left, but does anybody have questions or anything? New guys? Did I scare you off? You're never coming back again. You're like, what is this guy talking about? The older guys in here are like, we've been hearing him, we've been following him in this class for like 3 years now. We haven't understood a word he said. Questions? Vanover, good to see you.
Yeah?
Any questions?
Nope.
Wife?
It wasn't targeting.
She's a Longhorn fan too.
Hey, take all the help I can get.